Welcome back to another edition of our Health, Hope, and Happiness podcast brought to you by Stifel. On today's episode of Ask Dr. Steve Graef, owner of Mindurance, an organization for one-on-one online mental health coaching to help coaches and athletes manage their stress and enhance their performance. Today's topic is performance anxiety. If we look at the definition, Dr. Steve, performance anxiety is defined by extreme nervousness experienced before or during participation in an activity taking place in front of an audience. So that definitely fits the athlete in the sports world here. So as usual, we're going to take a look at this from a variety of perspectives, coaches, athletes, parents. But before diving into this topic, Dr. Steve, tell us a little bit about your experience. It's probably normal for every athlete to be a little nervous, have those butterflies. A lot of people define it as excitement, which is what you want if you're the coach or the athlete. Have you ever experienced performance anxiety before one of your football games?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I always say performance anxiety is what I like to call psychological sweat. So you imagine if you go for a workout, we were just talking about working out off camera, and if you go for a workout, you go for a run, you're going to sweat. Sweat is a natural byproduct of putting yourself in a demanding situation, exerting yourself. And so uh, whenever an athlete or a performer puts themselves in a challenging, novel um, situation where they have to psychologically exert themselves, I think it's totally reasonable that we're going to have some psychological sweat associated with that. And in this case, that psychological sweat is performance anxiety. So, very much a normal byproduct of putting ourselves in challenging situations are to feel somewhat anxious about it. So the task is to figure out how do we manage our anxiety and allow it to channel ourselves into positive energy versus having it derail us. So yes, I have absolutely experienced performance anxiety. I still experience performance anxiety, not necessarily in athletics, but when I go and I give a big presentation in front of a group of student athletes or an organization, there are absolutely nerves associated with that. And in fact, I went and visited Graceland once, and Graceland, the home of Elvis Presley, and I saw this little clip that said that Elvis Presley experienced stage fright prior to every show. And if the king of rock and roll gets performance anxiety before a performance, then certainly it's okay for the rest of us to get performance anxiety as well.
And how would he feel today with social media and everybody else taping every single thing he did? It'd probably go way off the charts.
Well, he invented the rock star. I mean, prior to Elvis Presley, a lot of these things did not exist. So he figured out the private jet. He figured out the fancy hotel stays, security, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot to pay homage to Mr. Presley himself.
All right, well, we're going to jump into the coaches side of things. Obviously, we're going to talk a little bit about a coach can also have some performance anxieties on the sidelines, but then maybe also the coach recognizing what his athlete may be going through prior to a game. So let's dive into this and take a little look at this. So when coaches first meet with their athletes prior to the season, should coaches begin like working on some sort of visualization or mental health strategies with their athletes to maybe work on this anxiety ahead of time?
Yes, I definitely think that there can be some time and space dedicated to that. And there's almost some two separate conversations going on here. There's like the anxiety associated from a mental health standpoint, and is this person kind of experiencing crippling anxiety in a variety of different contexts? That's perhaps a conversation that we could talk about another time. Um, but I think the conversation for our sake is more so the anxiety that people can get when in these high competition, high pressure situations. And I absolutely think a coach can start preparing their athletes accordingly in a variety of different ways. One, By normalizing anxiety. Hey, this season we plan on being in very high competitive states. And in those high competitive states, it is likely you're going to experience some anxiety. So normalizing the experience right from the get-go. Number two, you can create high stakes situations in practice that, maybe if we're going to do a particular play or pretend it's the final 2 minutes, and if it doesn't go well, maybe there's some gassers or something associated with that. Or if you don't make this free throw, there's like some push-ups that can be involved in that. And I know there's some pros and cons associated with doing that, but what it does do is it helps create an experience of anxiety in a safe container that helps individuals to figure out how to navigate and manage that anxiety when it pops up. Which means three, you're going to need some tools, tips, or interventions on how to manage that anxiety. So that's where I think coaches can utilize visualization to help athletes visualize themselves performing well in a high stakes environment, teaching athletes breathing and relaxation strategies as well, none of which take a lot of time, but do require a little bit of know-how and some expertise in order to employ.
So this sort of leads into the next question is sometimes coaches do put undue pressure on their athletes by saying, we have to win this game. This is the most important game of the season. And so they'll talk about this in practice a little bit. So going back to what you just say, if we've already done these steps at the beginning of the season, should that like lessen the stress and anxiety that coach, the players may feel that coach is putting on them for a big game?
Yeah, I think that there's some value in consistency, right? And presenting this reality of high competitive stakes and the reality of anxiety preseason and then throughout. However, I do think that there is this simultaneous two realities that we're holding at the same time. One is this is the most important game. We're recording this at the time of this recording. It's 2 days after the Super Bowl. There's no denying that the Super Bowl is the most important game of many of these individuals' lives. So we're not going to say this is just another game. Let's approach it like just another game, because it's not just another game. And no one's going to interpret it that way internally. So on the one hand, it's, yeah, you know what? This is a big game. And let's figure out how to manage our nerves, and so that manage our nerves better than the competition does, because we both recognize that it's one of the biggest games of our life. So holding that while also saying, okay, this is the biggest game, but at the end of the day, it's still just the game that we've been playing our entire season. And so focusing on effort, focusing on energy, focus on doing your job right, focus on managing the nerves. And that takes it into the micro moment and the process rather than the outcome. So if you're able to hold both of those simultaneously and communicate that effectively and have tools for approaching both of those simultaneously, I think it sets you up for handling it well.
So if a coach begins to start to see an athlete struggle a little bit with anxiety prior to the start of an athletic event, whether that's football, basketball, track, pick your sport, whatever, what can the coach do, or what steps should a coach do to maybe help get that athlete over that moment?
Yeah, well, I think just asking open-ended questions like, what's going on? How are you feeling? Can you tell me about what you're experiencing right now? And that can just open up to and extract some of the key concerns that the athlete is having, because the narrative that you're having may not necessarily be what's actually occurring in the student athlete. You may be thinking it's a big game, and maybe it's the kid's grandparents, it's the first time that they've showed up to a game. And so if you're thinking, I know it's a big game we've been talking about all week, and the kid's like, no, it's because grandpa's in the stands, it's a much different conversation. So by having the athlete open up, it allows you to really understand, what's going on. And oftentimes that's all you need to do. I mean, as a coach, you don't need to have the answers. I think sometimes we feel like we need to have the answers, that we need to fix the situation, but just giving them the space to open up, encouraging them to just simply focus on their breath. All right. Gaining some trust in them that, hey, you have the capacity to go out there and play and just have fun. right? Have fun with your teammates, have fun with yourself, engaging with those sports. And those are just some very simple kind of strategies, just bringing your heart to the situation and imagining if you were that athlete, how would you want to be attended to in the moment?
So at the outset, we talked a little bit about a coach may have anxiety themselves. And so how would a coach deal with their own anxiety during a situation in a key game or what he feels is a must-win game?
Yeah, well, again, I think that there's some upstream work that probably needs to happen because the reason why somebody is experiencing anxiety can vary. At the end of the day, there's really only two reasons why we experience anxiety, and it's the fear of death or the fear of injury, and the fear of being alone, aka rejection, and that's where the ego gets involved. So we're anxious because of either ego or injury. And in a lot of cases, with the kind of feeling anxiety because of the big game, it's this kind of proxy anxiety that I'm going to lose this game, we're losers, and I'm not going to get reinforced. I'm not going to be loved anymore. Now, rationally, we know that that's not the truth. But in our deep reptilian brains, that's how we're perceiving some of these things and the psychological sweat that comes up, the social damage, the ego damage that comes with a result of losing. So unless you have that really figured out of like why you're getting so anxious about the situation, that's kind of step one. And then step two is in the moment recognizing, okay, this is that anxiety popping up, normalizing, acknowledging I'm in a challenging, demanding situation right now. It makes sense because of psychological sweat that I'm going to be anxious. I'm going to take some deep breaths to center my mind and calm my body. And then I'm going to redirect my focus to the task at hand, which in this case would be coaching.
Yeah, and so you may have partially answered the next question. Like two of the biggest symptoms probably of anxiety are the release of adrenaline and your heart rate kind of goes up. So more times than not, before the game, those feelings are happening. Once the game kind of settles, kickoff happens, things normally settle down, that initial rush disappears. Everybody settles into the game. But if for some reason that would not happen, how can a coach avoid just like an all-out anxiety or panic attack themselves right there on the sidelines?
Oh, yeah. First off is just your own physicality and what are things that you're doing or consuming that's enhancing the likelihood of increased anxiety and heart rate. So things like coffee. I know in a lot of kind of male sports, tobacco, Zyn, pre-workout, these types of things that all have either nicotine or caffeine in them is going to lead to spikes in heart rate and blood pressure. Some supplements can have niacin and different things in them, which also create kind of warmth and feeling flush too. So being mindful of what you're consuming. But the quickest way to manage a panic attack or an increase in anxiety is by deliberately slowing down your breath. Because fortunately, we have the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system at work within our bodies. The sympathetic nervous system is fight or flight or flee, and the parasympathetic is the calm, the chill and still. And so if you're in a state of panic or anxiety or fight or flight, we need to hijack our brains and tell them everything is cool. Well, the way that we do that is by deliberately slowing down our breath. Because by deliberately slowing down our breath, it's communicating to our brain and bodies that there is no harm around here, there's no danger, there's no enemy, everything is safe. And if we want to induce energy, we can do that too by increasing our heart rate. We can increase our breathing, and that can pump us up. But similarly, we can calm ourselves down by slowing down our breath. So, what are we consuming beforehand? And if we find ourselves getting a spike in energy, deliberately slowing down and focusing on our breath.
Yeah, and then finally, as a former athlete, you very well know that players often feed off their coach and their coach's emotions, either in the locker room or, running out to the field. What should a coach do to kind of maintain a present mindset and then try to calm the players back down so we're level-headed and able to play in the game?
Yeah, well, role model it, right? Practice what you preach. And there's examples of all sorts of coaches, right? Very high energy coaches and very chill and still kind of coaches that exist in the world. So I think you want to be true to your personality, but I think there's also a bit of a wiggle room for you to play around with dynamically. And so even the real hyped coach has an opportunity to demonstrate a centered, controlled hype versus an outlandish or extraordinary hype that might initiate or influence a little bit more chaos and anxiety. But if you're hype in a very calm, like centered type of way, that's great. Same thing with the chill and still coach. You can be so chill and still that you almost look apathetic or that you don't care. That's not the chill and still that you want. You still want to be a very centered, engaged, chill and still if that's your style of coaching. So, but make no mistake, I think the reality is your players are looking to you and how are you reacting, and they have a trust or a mistrust in you and your ability to manage the game based on how you're reacting to situations yourself. So whatever you need to do to stay in that kind of zone of excellence, whether that's hype or chill for you, uh, do it with intentionality and use skills and resources to be able to maintain that even during times of stress.
And as always, is there anything you would like to add to wrap up this segment that we didn't get an opportunity to ask or discuss?
Well, a coach is a performer as well. And when it comes to performance, there is a technical aspect, a tactical aspect, a strategic aspect, a physical aspect, a social aspect, and a mental aspect. So don't lose sight of the mental aspect, because the mental aspect is going to influence the extent to which you feel very anxious or not during a performance. So don't leave it to chance. If you find somebody that has a tendency to get a little bit more anxious in performance situations, if you're able to channel that, great. But if you find that you do get a little bit more rattled, then it might be something you want to talk to a professional about.
Awesome. As always, thank you for your time. If you have a topic you would like us to discuss, please let me know. Otherwise, until the next time, we appreciate you listening to the Health, Hope, and Happiness podcast brought to you by Stifel.
We'll see you.